Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place in the cosmos where your thoughts can unwind and knowledge becomes a soft lullaby for the night. Tonight's journey will take us into a realm that feels both familiar and unfathomably distant. A place made not of stars and galaxies, but of salt water, pressure, and centuries of human awe. We're going deep, into the ocean's quiet mysteries, from the well-known to the never-explained, from the shipwrecks lost to time to the sounds no one has yet named. But before you settle in and get cozy, I'd love if you could take a moment to like this video and subscribe, only if you truly find these quiet explorations enjoyable. And when you're ready, leave a comment to let me know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always such a joy to see all the places we gather from, each in our own little slice of time. Now, feel free to dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for a soft background hum, and let's gently begin our journey into the deep together. And if your mind begins to wander, that's perfectly fine. Let it drift. We'll still be here, quietly unfolding the story. The ocean is many things, a vast expanse of water, yes, but also a mirror, a myth, a mystery that has lived alongside us for as long as we've dared to dream. It covers over 70% of our planet, yet so much of it remains untouched, unseen, and unknown. In fact, scientists say that we've explored only about 20% of it, if that. The rest is left to silence and shadows, to the slow rhythms of currents and the soft breath of tides. And perhaps that's why the ocean has always whispered to our imagination. There's something gently hypnotic about it, something that pulls at the edges of your thoughts, the way waves slowly pull at the shoreline, never in a rush, never demanding answers, only offering wonder. For centuries, the sea has been our map of mystery. Sailors once spoke of waters that boiled, of monsters the size of islands, of songs heard in the mist. Entire continents were imagined beneath the waves. Ships vanished without a trace, and as science advanced, some legends were explained, mapped, named, but many were not. And so tonight we'll descend together, not in a diving bell or a submarine, but in thought, in memory, in metaphor. We'll follow the iceberg model of Ocean Mysteries, not the icebergs that drift in Arctic water, but the idea of a mystery's shape, the part we see above the surface, and the vastness we do not. What we know is small. What remains hidden is vast. At the top of this iceberg are stories everyone knows. Mermaids, Atlantis, the Kraken, the Bermuda Triangle. They sit like seagulls on the surface, bright, noisy, familiar. But underneath, layer by layer, we find stranger, quieter things. Glowing oceans seen from space, an underwater lake where nothing survives, a sound that once echoed through thousands of kilometers of ocean and then vanished. And then we go deeper still, into the creatures we cannot classify, the phenomena we cannot quite explain, the objects that appear where they should not. And at the very bottom, past the pressure, past the darkness, past even our sense of scale, there's something else, something we don't need to name. Not because it's dangerous, but because it's quiet, ancient, patient. The ocean does not demand your attention. It doesn't chase you, it simply waits. That's why this topic, this gentle spiral into Salton story, fits so well here, on this sleepy little channel, because the sea is a perfect metaphor for the dreaming mind. Both are vast, unpredictable, impossible to fully map. Both can be calming and terrifying, peaceful and powerful. And both are most alive when left slightly undefined. You don't need to understand every current afloat. So tonight, think of this video not as a documentary, not as a lecture, but as a slow, floating vessel, a raft on a moonlit tide. Each session will carry us a little deeper, each idea a ripple that fades into the next. There won't be any sharp turns, no sudden storms, only drift and memory and the strange, hushed wonder of the sea. Maybe you'll stay with us the whole way, or maybe your thoughts will slip into sleep halfway through. Either is fine, there's no need to cling tightly. Like the ocean itself, we're just passing through. Now take a breath, a long one. Feel the air fill your lungs like wind filling a sail. And as you exhale, imagine us leaving the shore behind. The lights of the coast growing softer, the land dissolving into fog. You can hear the water now, gentle against the hull. You can feel the quiet beneath you, vast and waiting. This is where we begin, not at the bottom of the sea, not in the black trenches, but on the surface where story meets memory, where myth still floats beside science, and where even the most familiar legends carry a quiet echo of the unknown. The iceberg is waiting. Let's begin to descend. There's a kind of fear that doesn't shout or scream. It doesn't startle you suddenly or chase you through a dream. Instead, it sits quietly in the background, like a ripple just beneath the surface, and for many that fear is the sea. Not the waves brushing against your feet on a warm beach afternoon, not the gentle sway of a boat on a calm bay, but the part of the sea you cannot see, the deep part, the vast black part, the part that stretches out further than your eyes could ever follow and drops down deeper than sunlight can reach. That's where the mind begins to whisper things. This fear has a name, thalassophobia. It's the fear of deep water, of open water, of the ocean's endless unknown. But even if the term sounds unfamiliar, the feeling probably isn't. It's the quiet unease when you float above a bottom you can't see. The chill that rises when you imagine what might be rising from below. It's not irrational. It's ancient. It's a leftover instinct from a time when our ancestors looked at the ocean not as a place of leisure, but of danger, mystery, and myth. And it's in that space, where fear meets imagination, that folklore is born. Long before we had maps or sonar or scientific diving, we had stories. And the ocean, so enormous, so unknowable, became the perfect canvas for them. It's where we placed our gods, our monsters, our sunken cities and singing spirits. The more mysterious the sea remained, the more our minds filled it in. Perhaps no tale is more enduring than that of Atlantis, the fabled lost city beneath the waves. First mentioned by Plato over 2,000 years ago, Atlantis was never meant to be taken literally. Plato used it as an allegory, a symbol of hubris and downfall. But something about the idea stuck, a civilization swallowed by the sea. Entire streets, temples and treasures entombed in silence. Atlantis wasn't just a metaphor, it became a myth of longing, a belief that somewhere out there, just beyond our reach, lies something extraordinary that time forgot. It has inspired explorers, authors, conspiracy theorists and daydreamers alike. Whether it existed or not has become almost irrelevant. What matters is how real it feels when you let your mind drift toward it. And then there are the mermaids, or their darker cousins, the sirens, half human, half fish, always alluring. In some cultures they sang sailors to their deaths. In others they were protectors or omens. The idea of the sea having a voice, a face, a form we could fall in love with. It's old and strangely comforting. Perhaps we gave the ocean these beings because we needed someone to talk to when it grew too quiet. Or perhaps, when ships vanished, we needed someone to blame. Some historians believe the myth of the mermaid arose from sightings of manatees and dugongs, gentle marine mammals with vaguely human features when seen from a distance. But a lonely sailor on the 15th night at sea doesn't always need accuracy. Sometimes he just needs wonder. The Kraken was never subtle. Where mermaids sang, the Kraken crushed. Described as a monstrous sea creature the size of an island, it was said to drag entire ships into the depths with its tentacled arms. For centuries sailors feared it, wrote of it, swore they saw it, and then, much later, science revealed the giant squid. Not a myth, not a story, but a real creature, long, alien, elusive, living in the deep. The Kraken, it turns out, was never completely imaginary, just misunderstood. And maybe that's what makes sea legends so persistent. They're rarely pure invention. They're exaggerations, echoes, distortions of something that was real once, or still is, just beyond our understanding. In ancient religious texts and seafaring cultures, monsters like the Leviathan roamed the waters, massive, coiled, unstoppable. In Greek mythology, Scylla and Charybdis waited on either side of a narrow strait. One a snarling creature, the other a whirlpool. Sailors had to pass between them, choosing which danger they could survive. The phrase "between Scylla and Charybdis" still means navigating two equally perilous choices. Even in modern language, these ancient sea creatures haven't entirely left us. But perhaps they were never meant to be creatures. Perhaps they were just ways to talk about chaos, about the parts of the world we can't control. The ocean is nature's original metaphor for the unknown, and monsters gave it shape. And yet, not all sea fears are born from danger. Some are born from beauty so vast it becomes terrifying. When you stand on the shore at night, listening to waves stretch out into endless darkness, you're not always afraid of what's in the water. Sometimes, you're afraid of how small you feel beside it. The stories we tell about the sea, about mermaids, cities, monsters, aren't just about the ocean. They're about us, our wonder, our fear, our longing, and our need to turn silence into story. And the sea has always listened. It hasn't answered, but it has listened. So as we begin to explore the layers of mystery beneath the surface, let's remember that not everything unknown is meant to be feared. Some things are simply waiting for a gentler kind of attention, the kind that doesn't demand proof, just presence. You don't need to believe in Atlantis to feel its pull. You don't need to fear the Kraken to respect the dark, and you don't need to explain the siren song to hear it, softly, between the waves. Let's keep drifting. The ocean has always worn a veil, sometimes thin like mist over a tide pool, and sometimes thick and heavy, like midnight over a trench. And for all our satellites, submarines and sonar maps, most of that veil remains intact. You've likely heard the often quoted fact: over 80% of the ocean remains unexplored. It floats around the internet like driftwood, sometimes offered as a marvel, sometimes a warning. But what does that really mean? It means that of all the places on Earth, the deep sea is the most stubbornly unknown. We've mapped the surfaces of Mars and the Moon in greater detail than we've charted the ocean floor beneath our own planet. Not because we aren't curious, but because the ocean resists being known. Imagine trying to explore a world where there is no light, where the pressure can crush steel, where temperatures hover just above freezing, and where even the most basic movements are slowed by dense resistance. That's the challenge of deep-sea exploration. It's not just dark, it's cold, crushing, and complicated. Light fades quickly in water. Even a few dozen meters down, colour begins to vanish. Red disappears first, then orange, then yellow, until all that remains is a ghostly blue. Beyond 200 meters, we reach what's called the twilight zone, where light is more memory than presence. Go deeper still past 1,000 meters, and you enter the midnight zone. No sunlight reaches here, only the occasional glimmer from bioluminescent life. Past that, the abyss, a place where even words begin to falter. Pressure increases rapidly as you descend. For every 10 meters of depth, another atmosphere of pressure is added. At the deepest points, like the Mariana Trench, that pressure reaches over 1,000 times what we experience at the surface. It's like trying to walk beneath the weight of 50 jumbo jets. Most vehicles can't survive it. Most robots need to be specially built. And humans, we can't even visit the bottom ourselves without layers of machinery between us and the crushing black. So while satellites can skim across space, our ocean demands patience. It asks for quiet. It punishes speed. It reveals itself slowly and only to those willing to listen without hurry. This is part of why so much of the sea remains a mystery. But it's also part of its charm. The ocean isn't a puzzle meant to be solved. It's a presence meant to be approached gently. Still, human curiosity doesn't rest. Take the Bermuda Triangle, for instance. That stretch of ocean between Miami, Bermuda and Puerto Rico has captured imaginations for decades. Ships disappearing, planes vanishing mid-flight, radios going silent, entire crews never found again. It's the kind of story that grabs you, not because it's full of hard evidence, but because it's full of silence. The real explanations for most Bermuda Triangle incidents are often simple: sudden storms, human error, navigational challenges in a region with strong currents and variable weather. And yet, the myth persists. Why? Because the sea doesn't explain itself. And when something disappears over water, it tends to disappear completely. There are no skid marks on the sea, no trace of brake lights, no footprints left behind. Just an empty space where something used to be, and a horizon that tells you nothing. And in that void, the human mind begins to imagine. That's the quiet seduction of maritime mystery. Things vanish, and the sea remains unchanged. It gives no answers, only ripples, and even those fade fast. In recent decades, scientists and engineers have developed new technologies to pierce these watery unknowns. Remote-operated vehicles, deep-diving submersibles, sonar mapping systems. We've discovered underwater mountain ranges taller than the Rockies, valleys deeper than the Grand Canyon, and creatures stranger than any fiction. But for every answer we find, a dozen more questions take its place. We learned, for instance, that hydrothermal vents, once thought to be barren zones, are thriving ecosystems where life exists not through sunlight but through chemical energy. Entire biomes living in the dark, feeding not on photosynthesis but on minerals and heat. It forced us to rethink where and how life can exist. We found brine pools, underwater lakes inside the ocean, where the water is so salty and dense that it doesn't mix with the seawater around it. A lake at the bottom of a sea, a border within fluid. Even fish seem to hesitate at its edge, and we continue to find things we don't yet understand. Sounds, shapes, behaviours, species never before seen. The more we look, the more we realise how little we know. But this isn't discouraging, it's humbling. It reminds us that mystery isn't the absence of knowledge. It's the invitation to keep exploring, to stay curious, to wander, even without destination. So when we say that 80% of the ocean is unexplored, it's not just a statistic, it's a lullaby of possibility. It means there are places, right now as you're listening, where no one has ever been. Places where the water has never been stirred by human hands. Where creatures live without names, where silence stretches uninterrupted by even the softest sonar pulse. Somewhere out there, a creature might be swimming in absolute darkness, never once knowing that a world of sunlight exists above it. And here you are, breathing in your quiet room, thinking about that creature you've never seen, that connection, that thin line of wonder between you and the unknown is what keeps science soft and dreaming alive. The ocean is not empty, it's simply quiet, and quiet things have a lot to say if you're willing to listen. Let's keep going. If fear has a shape, for many people it resembles teeth. Not just any teeth, but those belonging to something enormous, something ancient, something that has been waiting, silent beneath the waves. That something in the minds of many is the Megalodon. Its name means big tooth, and it lives up to the title. The fossilized teeth of this prehistoric shark are longer than your hand, serrated like steak knives, and heavy enough to remind you that their former owner wasn't just large, it was monstrous. Estimates suggest the Megalodon could grow up to 60 feet in length, making it more than 3 times the size of a great white shark. It ruled the oceans for millions of years, a shadow beneath the waves that even whales would have feared. And then, at some point, it vanished. Roughly 3.6 million years ago, the Megalodon is believed to have gone extinct. Its disappearance isn't entirely mysterious. Scientists suggest that changing ocean temperatures, the loss of prey, and the rise of more agile competitors like the early orcas all played a role. But even as the fossil record tells a fairly clear story, the human imagination has refused to close the book. Because deep down, perhaps too deep for logic to reach, many still wonder if it might be out there. Not often, not loudly, but maybe, just maybe. There's something fascinating about creatures that once ruled and then fell silent. The Megalodon sits at the intersection between fact and folklore. It was real, undeniably. It left behind evidence in stone. But in the absence of a body, of a final, observable end, it drifted into legend. You've probably seen the modern recreations, the enormous jaw reconstructed in museums, large enough for a person to stand inside. You may have watched the sensational documentaries or the viral stories that claim a blurry photo proves it still swims somewhere in the ocean's deepest trench. But it's not really about proof. It's about presence. The Megalodon has become something more than an extinct predator. It's a metaphor for the fear that something old and powerful hasn't truly died. That just beneath the surface of what we know, something ancient still stirs. And that metaphor fits the sea perfectly, because the ocean is in many ways a realm of echoes. Time doesn't move through it the way it does on land. Sediment settles slowly, cold preserves, light never arrives. Sounds linger, carried through the water over distances impossible in air. Fossils are found not because the ocean reveals them, but because we've gently dug into its memory. The Megalodon, then, becomes a kind of dream fossil, one that walks between eras. It once existed, and now it doesn't, or so we believe. But unlike the dinosaurs, it left behind no bones, only teeth. Unlike land mammals, its extinction happened in the depths. Its departure was quiet, and so its return, or the possibility of it, also lives in quiet. There's a comfort in some strange way to imagining that it might still be there, that in a corner of the world where sunlight doesn't reach and pressure folds steel like paper, a massive creature could exist without ever being seen. Science tells us it's gone. Paleontology maps its age and decline. But stories don't always obey data. They linger where evidence fades, filling in the blanks with what if and maybe. In 2013, a widely circulated photo emerged, showing what appeared to be a giant dorsal fin trailing behind a boat. The image, grainy and nondescript, fed the fire of speculation. Was it a great white? A whale? Something else? No clear answer came, and in the absence of clarity, the myth once again took its place at the helm. Then there's the 2003 incident involving a tagged great white shark off the coast of Australia. The tag recorded a rapid dive, a sudden temperature shift, and a disappearance, leading some to suggest that the shark was eaten by something larger. More grounded explanations followed, of course. A predator, a scavenger, a malfunction. But the idea that something unknown swallowed a great white hole, that story lingered louder than any spreadsheet. Because we want things to survive us. We want the past to be just out of sight, not gone. And the ocean, more than any other place, lets us hold on to that hope. The Megalodon is a symbol, not just of power or size, but of the idea that the world is still wild. That despite our maps and machines, there are places where something immense might still move slowly through the dark. It reminds us that extinction is a concept, not a feeling. The facts can be firm, but the feeling of awe, of unease, of possibility never truly disappears. That's what makes it beautiful in its own way. Not the fear, but the echo. Not the monster, but the memory. And so, whether the Megalodon is long gone or hiding in some trench is almost beside the point. What matters is that it keeps swimming through our thoughts, that it continues to remind us that some shadows in the deep are better left undefined. When you hear the word Megalodon, you don't picture bones or diagrams. You picture teeth in the dark, a shape beneath the surface, a feeling, and sometimes a feeling is more powerful than fact. Let's keep following the echo. If the sea could remember, perhaps it would do so with light, not with bright explosions or artificial beams, but with the gentle kind of light that flickers and fades like an old memory. The kind of light that appears only when conditions are perfect, unrushed, unnoticed by most, and easily missed if you blink at the wrong moment. Tonight, we'll follow that light, drifting with it as it dances at the edge of science and story. Let's begin with a moment that feels like magic but isn't. Something called the green flash. It happens just as the sun dips below the horizon or rises above it. For a second, maybe two, a brilliant green glow appears at the very top of the sun, like the earth is winking back at the sky. It's not a trick of fantasy, but a quirk of physics. As sunlight travels through the thickest part of the atmosphere near the horizon, it gets bent and scattered. Because green light is slightly less scattered than blue and arrives after red and yellow have already faded, we're sometimes gifted with this brief, jade-coloured shimmer. Sailors once believed it meant truth, that if you saw the green flash, you'd never be deceived again. Others thought it was the soul of the ocean brushing against the sun just once before letting it go. Science offers an explanation, but science, here, doesn't erase the beauty. It merely tells us what kind of glass the lens is made from. The light remains. From the sky, we turn to the sea itself, where a different kind of glow waits in darker waters. You might have heard of it, the Milky Sea phenomenon. Unlike the green flash, which is quick and rare, the Milky Sea is slow, vast, and almost impossible to believe the first time you hear it. Imagine looking out across the ocean at night and seeing not black water, but a pale, ghostly field of light, stretching for kilometres, glowing not from above but from within. Not moonlight, not ships, but the sea itself glowing white-blue like mist suspended in liquid. It's not fiction. It's been seen. Sailors in the Indian Ocean have reported it for centuries, and now, with the help of satellite imagery, we've captured it from space, the source, tiny organisms, bioluminescent bacteria, drifting in the upper layers of the ocean, lighting up all at once. No one knows exactly why they do it. Some believe it's a defense mechanism, others suggest it's a form of communication, and some theories imply that it may be tied to population density, an eerie, glowing form of quorum sensing. But in the stillness of night, explanations feel less urgent than awe. These bacteria belong to a larger family of light givers, creatures that turn their own bodies into lanterns, fireflies of the deep, jellyfish that pulse with soft blues and greens, squid that flicker like stars, even fish with lights under their eyes, like reading lamps they carry through the dark. Bioluminescence, the ability of living things to produce light, is far more common in the ocean than on land. In fact, it's estimated that the majority of deep-sea species can do it. In a place where sunlight never reaches, making your own glow is not a novelty. It's survival. Some creatures use it to attract mates. Others use it to lure prey. Some flash violently to startle predators. And a few release glowing clouds into the water like underwater smoke bombs, allowing them to disappear into darkness. But beyond the utility, there's something deeply moving about this quiet illumination. In the deep sea, where pressure is immense and life is slow, there are beings that carry their own light inside them. Creatures that have no eyes and yet they shine. Creatures that will never be seen by a human eye and yet they glow as if on stage. It reminds us that beauty doesn't require an audience. That wonder doesn't wait for recognition. To witness bioluminescence in person is to stand at the edge of a dream. In shallow bays, You might see it swirl around your feet as you wade in the dark. Each step releases tiny bursts of light, like footsteps through stardust. In deeper waters, you might trail your fingers from a boat and leave a glowing wake behind you. It's as though the ocean is gently acknowledging your presence, and perhaps it is. These glowing waters have been with us for longer than memory. Sailors called them fairy fire. In some traditions it was seen as a blessing, in others a warning. The line between divine and dangerous has always been thin on the sea. But in truth, bioluminescence is simply the ocean's way of remembering itself. A chemical process, yes. But also maybe a kind of language, a soft, flickering reminder that life persists, even where nothing should survive. There is a silence in the deep sea, but not emptiness. And in that silence, light speaks. We often think of the ocean as dark, and it is. But within that darkness are stories told in pulses and glows. Not all mysteries roar. Some whisper, some shimmer. So tonight, as we drift between sky and sea, between science and stillness, let's hold on to this. The light is not always above us. Sometimes it comes from below. Sometimes it rises from within. Let's keep floating. If light is the ocean's memory, then sound may be its voice, soft, slow, and stretched across impossible distances. Beneath the surface, far from the reach of wind and wave, sound becomes something else entirely. It bends, it echoes, it lingers, and sometimes it tells stories no one expected. In 1997, deep in the southern Pacific Ocean, a strange sound was recorded by hydrophones, special underwater microphones, placed there by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. The sound was low in frequency, incredibly powerful, and unlike anything catalogued before. It rose in pitch quickly, lasted less than a minute, and was detected across more than 5,000 kilometres. It was named, with charming simplicity, the Bloop. At first, the origin was unknown. Its spectral qualities resemble those of biological sounds, meaning it sounded in some ways like it could have come from a living creature. But its volume was staggering. If it had been made by an animal, that animal would have had to be something enormous, far larger than any known whale. And so, speculation began to stir. Documentaries whispered of giant sea monsters. The internet brewed theories of undiscovered leviathans. Fiction, of course, filled in the blanks with elegant menace. For years, the Bloop remained unexplained. It echoed not just across ocean basins, but through imaginations. Its audio file, strange and brief, was replayed, dissected, and interpreted by those hoping for a revelation, or perhaps for a mystery that would stay unsolved. Eventually, NOAA scientists suggested a more grounded explanation. The sound, they said, closely matched known recordings of ice quakes, large icebergs cracking or scraping against the ocean floor. The frequencies, the pitch, even the reverberation patterns lined up. It was not, they concluded, a creature, but a geological phenomenon. And perhaps they're right. But something in us resists such neat resolutions. Not because we distrust science, but because we treasure wonder. When the unknown becomes known, a kind of silence follows. Clean, clear, and final. And sometimes we'd rather leave a little static on the line. The Bloop wasn't the only unexplained sound the ocean has offered. There was Julia, recorded in 1999, another low-frequency burst heard across the Pacific, its source never definitively identified. Then Upsweep, a repeating rising sound, seasonal, fading and returning like a breath across years. Then Train and Whistle and Slow Down, each with its own personality, each with its own silence wrapped around it. Some were likely caused by ice, others by tectonic movement. A few may remain unclassified. All of them speak not of monsters necessarily, but of how little we truly hear. The ocean is not quiet. It hums, clicks, pulses, groans. Whales sing, shrimp snap. Submarines glide silently through distant trenches. Even the earth itself rumbles beneath the seafloor, its voice muffled but insistent. These sounds don't travel the way they do in air. Water carries sound much farther and faster, and in the right conditions, within a layer known as the SOFAR channel, sound can travel for thousands of kilometres with barely any loss in strength. It's a natural conduit, a kind of auditory highway found at specific depths where temperature and pressure balance in just the right way. In this space, a whale's call can echo from one side of an ocean basin to the other. A noise from an iceberg falling into the sea can travel farther than a jet plane could fly in an hour. And a sound like the bloop, once, can become an entire generation's question. It's important to note that these explanations, as quiet as they are, don't strip the ocean of its mystery. They simply change the kind of story we're telling. Maybe it's not a sea monster roaring, but the earth itself sighing. Maybe it's not a creature calling out, but a glacier letting go. That too has beauty. Because when we frame the sea as a place where only the bizarre or terrifying can surprise us, we forget that even natural processes can feel magical when we meet them for the first time. When you listen to the bloop, you're not hearing something ancient awakening. You're hearing the sea shift slightly in its sleep. And even now, as we explore more of the ocean's acoustics, many sounds still remain unclaimed. Not because they're alien, not because they're monstrous, but because the sea is simply very good at keeping secrets. It doesn't need to hide things deliberately. It just is. Vast, layered, full of thresholds and thermoclines, channels and currents. Sound disappears here, bends there, reappears hundreds of miles away with its edges blurred. It's a library where the books rearrange themselves, a conversation where the speaker is never in the same room twice. That's the charm of maritime soundscapes. They don't give you full sentences, just fragments, just syllables, just echoes. And in the dark, when you're half asleep, when your breathing matches the slow rhythm of the tide, sometimes it's those fragments that feel most real. Not because they inform, but because they linger. So whether the bloop was an iceberg or something else, or something we'll never know, let it be a reminder that there are still voices out there, humming through the water, whispering in long, low tones we can barely catch. Not every voice wants to be found. Some just want to be heard. And in the quiet of your room tonight, as you listen to the distant memory of a sound recorded decades ago, you're hearing the ocean too. Not its full story, but a note from its song. Let's keep listening. Some stories live not because they're unfinished, but because they're unforgettable. The sinking of the Titanic is one of those stories. A quiet wound in maritime history, echoing, across more than a century, resurfacing not as scandal or mystery, but as a solemn reminder of how small we are beside the sea. It was a ship of extraordinary ambition. Built to be the largest and most luxurious vessel of its time, the Titanic was crafted with confidence, perhaps even hubris. They called it unsinkable. A floating palace of iron and dreams, it carried over 2,000 passengers across the North Atlantic, cutting through dark, frigid waters on its maiden voyage. But as history gently reminds us, nature does not negotiate. On the night of April 14th, 1912, the ship struck an iceberg, and within hours it slipped beneath the surface, slowly then all at once, into a place where no promise or technology could follow. When you think of the Titanic, you might picture the grand staircase, the lifeboats, the flares, or perhaps the soft silence of the wreck, now lying 2.5 miles beneath the surface, slowly dissolving into the deep. But beyond the tragedy and beyond the cinema, there is something deeply elemental about the story. The confrontation between human certainty and the indifference of the sea. Because the ocean does not care what you build or how well you plan. It does not fear steel or admire design. It is ancient. It moves by laws that existed before you, and it listens only to the wind, the tide, and the pull of the moon. The Titanic is not just a lost ship. It is a monument to humility. But the sea does not only assert itself through icebergs. Sometimes it speaks through waves. Rogue waves, to be specific. These are no ordinary swells. They are not the rhythmic rolling movements of a gentle sea. Rogue waves are anomalies, sudden, towering walls of water that rise seemingly from nowhere, often twice the height of surrounding waves, and capable of striking with the force of a freight train. For centuries, sailors whispered of such waves, calling them monster waves or freak waves. Their stories were met with skepticism. No one had seen them, no one had recorded them. Science dismissed them as sailors' tales. Until 1995, on New Year's Day, a platform in the North Sea known as the Draupner Rig recorded a wave over 80 feet tall, unexpected, unforecasted, and undeniably real. It was the first hard evidence of something long believed impossible, and suddenly, the old stories didn't sound so impossible anymore. Since then, rogue waves have been observed more frequently. They're not common, but they're not as rare as once thought. Some strike cruise ships and oil platforms, leaving windows shattered and steel bent. Others are suspected in the disappearance of vessels lost without distress calls, without wreckage, just gone. Their cause is complex. Some result from the convergence of different wave systems, multiple wave trains overlapping in just the wrong way at just the right time. Others may stem from changes in ocean current, wind direction, or underwater topography. But the truth is, even now, we don't fully understand them. They arrive suddenly. They move fast. They leave silence behind. And in that sense, they are like the Titanic, a reminder that, despite our systems and safeguards, the sea still holds surprises. But perhaps it's not surprise we fear most. Perhaps it's power. Quiet, undeniable power. The kind that does not roar but rumbles beneath the surface, unseen until it's already upon you. That's what the sea offers us. Not cruelty, not punishment, but a vastness that doesn't care whether we are watching. And still, we cross it. We build ships. We study currents. We dive to its floor. We write about it. We sail into it again and again, knowing full well that we are small, and it is not. Because awe and fear are not opposites. They're siblings. They often walk hand in hand. There's something humbling about a rogue wave. It reminds you that, for all our talk of progress and mastery, we still move through a world that is, in large part, unmapped and unpredictable. There's comfort in that, strange as it may seem. A comfort in knowing that nature still has its secrets, that the world hasn't grown entirely familiar. And if the Titanic was a lesson, and rogue waves are the punctuation, then perhaps the ocean itself is the author, writing in water, editing with wind. You don't need to see a wave rise to respect its possibility, and you don't need to visit a wreck to feel its stillness. The sea teaches in echoes, not lectures. It invites you to listen, not conquer. And as you sit here tonight, far from any ship or storm, just a listener drifting in the dark, remember that you are, in a way, part of this conversation. A tiny voice floating gently atop something vast. Let's keep sailing. There's a particular kind of silence that lingers around a drifting ship. It's not the silence of still air or untouched snow. It's the kind that feels like someone was just here, just moments ago, and then vanished without a trace. The kind that leaves open teacups, lit lanterns, footsteps that go nowhere. It's a silence that breathes. Of all the stories told by the sea, the tale of the Mary Celeste continues to haunt. Not because of what was found, but because of what wasn't. She was a sturdy merchant brigantine, built for transatlantic journeys. On November 7th, 1872, she departed New York Harbour, bound for Genoa, Italy, with 7 crew members, the captain, his wife, and their 2-year-old daughter. She carried over 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol in her hold. It was, by all accounts, a routine voyage. But on December 5th, Another ship, the Dei Gratia, spotted the Mary Celeste adrift between the Azores and Portugal. When they boarded her, they found no one, not a single person. The sails were damaged, the lifeboat was gone, but there was no sign of violence, no fire, no storm. The cargo was mostly intact, the food stores untouched. Personal belongings remained, in place. The captain's log stopped abruptly 10 days earlier. It was as if everyone had simply stepped off. And so the sea added another echo to its long archive of unanswered questions. Theories abound. Some suggest alcohol fumes caused an explosion scare, prompting an orderly evacuation that turned tragic. Others propose piracy, mutiny, waterspouts, rogue waves, or poisoned food. But none of these quite explain the eerie neatness of the scene. And so the Mary Celeste became a ghost, not because she died, but because she returned, hollowed out, quiet, and filled with the absence of answers. She's not alone in this strange category. In 2007, the Australian catamaran Cas 2 was found drifting near the Great Barrier Reef. Like the Mary Celeste, her engine was running. A laptop was open, the table was set, but her 3-man crew was missing. Gone. No distress call, no sign of struggle, just wind and time moving through an empty vessel. Then there's the High Aim 6, a Taiwanese fishing boat found near the Australian coast in 2003. The boat was in good condition, fuel and supplies were on board, but the crew, again, was gone. Later, one man was arrested in Indonesia, admitting to a mutiny, but even so, many details never added up. The radio remained untouched. There was no sign of a struggle, only the quiet. Why do these stories linger? Why do ghost ships feel more haunting than shipwrecks? Perhaps it's because they come back. Wrecks are final. They're buried under water and time. But ghost ships return as questions, drifting slowly into view, carrying the shape of people who are no longer there. The human mind fills in the blanks not with logic but with shadow. Who lit that lantern? Who folded that blanket? Why did they leave, and where did they go? It's the same reason we feel unsettled in abandoned houses or untouched hotel rooms with the keys still warm. There's something about a place recently used and suddenly empty that bends time slightly. It's the illusion of continuity, interrupted. The sea amplifies this feeling. A ship is not a building. It's not tethered to land or anchored to memory. It floats. It moves. It holds only what it's given. And when left alone, it becomes a strange kind of tomb. Not for bodies, but for the stories we'll never know. Sometimes the absence is louder than a scream, and the ocean seems to understand this. It does not cry out. It does not clarify. It lets the ship drift, barnacles forming slowly along the hull, ropes fraying in the salt wind. Eventually the name fades from the stern, paint peels, metal rusts, but the question remains. The sea is filled with such unfinished sentences. That's why ghost ships don't need horror to be haunting. They don't need special effect or loud music or the supernatural. All they need is a quiet deck, a wheel turning gently in the breeze, and the knowledge that someone was once here and now isn't. There's an old maritime superstition that an abandoned ship becomes cursed if it sails too long without a name. But maybe what truly curses these ships is our inability to let go, our longing for narrative closure, our desire to explain what was never explained to begin with. But maybe we don't need answers. Maybe the beauty of these stories is in the way they resist resolution. They invite us not to solve, but to feel, to stand at the edge of the known, where logic fades and wonder begins. Because in the end, the sea doesn't owe us anything. Not its reasons, not its truths, only its surface, and the things that float there, momentarily visible before slipping back beneath the waves. So next time you hear of a ship found empty, drifting across the quiet ocean, think of it not as a mystery to crack, but as a poem half finished. A letter from the sea, signed only with silence. Let's keep drifting. The ocean is often framed as a force that needs to be tamed, mapped, contained, repurposed. We lay cables across its floors, we build rigs upon its surface, and we even try to sculpt its habitats for our own designs. But the sea has its own rhythm, and when something doesn't belong, it doesn't scream or fight. It simply undoes, slowly, patiently, and without fuss. The story of Osborne Reef is not one of catastrophe, but of a well-intentioned plan slowly unravelling under the quiet judgment of nature. In the 1970s, just off the coast of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, an ambitious environmental project began. The goal was simple in concept and noble in aim: to build an artificial reef. Coral reefs, teeming with life and biodiversity, were under threat. So humans, as they often do, stepped in to help, this time by providing a new surface for marine life to colonise and flourish upon. But instead of rocks or carefully designed structures, the chosen building blocks were tyres. Over 2 million old car tyres bundled together in nylon and steel were dropped into the Atlantic. The thinking was sound enough. The tyres were abundant, durable, and considered inert. They wouldn't pollute. They'd form nooks and crevices for fish. They'd anchor marine growth. They'd be cheap, fast, and effective. But the sea had other plans. What followed wasn't a sudden disaster, but a slow unmaking. Over time, the bindings holding the tyre bundles together began to fail. Salt, current, and the relentless motion of water eroded the nylon straps. As the bundles broke apart, individual tyres began to roll. Not just a few, but thousands, dragged by waves, tumbling across the seafloor like silent wheels searching for a road. Instead of nurturing coral, the loose tyres began crushing it. Instead of attracting fish, they formed dead zones. The tyres didn't biodegrade, but they didn't stay still either. Storms swept them into natural reefs, scattering them like refuse. Some washed back onto the shore, some tangled in fishing nets, some simply disappeared into the murky sediment, forgotten by most, but still there. What was meant to be a solution became a cautionary tale, one that still isn't finished. For decades, divers have been working to retrieve the tyres, bundle by bundle, hauling them out of the water in a slow, quiet reversal. It's not an emergency. No sirens, no headlines, just people in wetsuits correcting a mistake one tyre at a time. But perhaps mistake is too harsh a word, because Osborne Reef wasn't born of greed or carelessness. It came from a desire to help, a desire rooted in the belief that we could fix what was breaking. What it revealed instead is that helping is not always simple, and that nature accepts some offerings while refusing others. The ocean doesn't judge. It doesn't say yes or no. It just responds. And if something doesn't fit its rhythm, it's gently rejected, disassembled, repurposed, buried, or returned to the shore. It's a kind of wisdom, really. A quiet editorial process. What grows, stays. What fails to adapt, moves on. What harms is weathered down. No drama, no fanfare. Just time and tide doing their work. There's something humbling in that. The idea that the ocean doesn't need us to save it with grand gestures or clever shortcuts. What it needs, perhaps, is less. Less interference, less imposition, less fixing, and more listening. Coral reefs, as delicate as they are vibrant, grow slowly. They don't need tyre walls or industrial leftovers. They need space, clean water, the absence of harm. Sometimes, letting the sea heal means stepping back, not leaning in. Osborne Reef is still there, in fragments. You can see it on satellite images, an accidental monument to misplaced optimism. But it's also a reminder that even failures can become part of the story. That intentions, however flawed in execution, are still a kind of reaching out. And that reaching, even when it falters, is what makes us human. In some ways, the reef has become something else. A reef of memory, of what we thought we knew. A place where tires rest in silt and the lesson isn't shouted, but whispered by currents and algae. And maybe that's what the sea teaches us best. Not through storms or monsters, but through patience. Through what it accepts and what it quietly refuses. We often think of nature as fragile, but in truth it's only fragile when we try to reshape it too quickly. Left alone, it adapts. Slowly, imperceptibly, perfectly. Osborne Reef wasn't a disaster. It was a pause, a soft no, and the ocean, in its infinite patience, allowed us to listen. So next time we think of building something new beneath the waves, perhaps we'll remember this. The sea doesn't need more things. It needs more time, more quiet, more respect for the things already there. And perhaps, in that silence, we'll begin to understand what the ocean has been telling us all along. Let's keep listening. Imagine descending through the dark waters of the Gulf of Mexico. The light above you fades to blue, then to grey, then to nothing at all. The temperature drops, the pressure increases, and just when the world seems uniform in its stillness, you see something strange. A shimmer, a surface, a boundary that looks like another body of water lying at the bottom of the sea. It's not a hallucination. It's real. You found a brine pool, an underwater lake that doesn't mix with the ocean surrounding it. And this one, with a name pulled straight from science fiction, is called the Jacuzzi of Despair. It's not hot like its name suggests, but it is, in every way, deadly. Brine pools form when salt deposits buried beneath the seafloor dissolve and rise. The result is a basin of water so dense and saline that it doesn't blend with the seawater around it. Instead, it sits like a second ocean, thicker, heavier, and often toxic. The boundary between the two layers is distinct. You can see it, like glass, like a mirror, like a portal. And it's not just beautiful, it's dangerous. In the Jacuzzi of Despair, located roughly 3,300 feet down, the salinity is 5 times higher than normal seawater. It also contains toxic levels of methane and hydrogen sulfide, gases that make this brine pool a death trap for most marine life. Crabs, fish, and other creatures that stray too close are stunned, poisoned, and sometimes killed outright. Their bodies litter the edges of the pool like fallen leaves around a pond in autumn. The name jacuzzi came from the discovery's initial appearance. Bubbling gas, warmth, and movement, like a hot tub swirling in the shadows. But it's a misnomer cloaked in irony. There is no comfort here, no warmth, only exclusion. And yet, not everything avoids it. Around the edges of the pool, where toxicity begins to soften and danger becomes manageable, scientists found something remarkable: life. Mussels clustered along the rim, feeding not on sunlight or oxygen, but on bacteria that convert chemicals into energy. Worms wriggled through sediment where most creatures dare not move. Microbes thrived in the boundary zone, adapted not in spite of the harshness, but because of it. This is what scientists call an extremophile ecosystem. Life built to endure the unendurable. Creatures that live without light, without safety, without the usual pathways of sustenance. And in that resilience there is something almost poetic. Because the Jacuzzi of Despair is not just a curiosity, it's a mirror, a glimpse into how life might exist elsewhere. On Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, where oceans lie hidden beneath a shell of ice. On Enceladus, with its watery plumes and subsurface seas. On exoplanets orbiting distant stars, where warmth may come not from the sun but from geothermal vents, chemical reactions and pressure. The life forms found near brine pools are more than survivors. They're ambassadors from the edges of possibility, proof that biology doesn't always need comfort, just opportunity. But still, there's a quiet eeriness to the scene. a shimmering lake beneath a sea, a pool where life enters and rarely leaves, a place that feels like it belongs in a dream or a myth. Not because it's magical, but because it plays by different rules. Even fish seem to recognise the boundary. In footage taken by deep-sea submersibles, you can see them approach the edge and hesitate. Some dip a fin or two below the threshold, then dart away. Some are not so lucky. The waterline has no warning sign, but its chemistry speaks volumes. To look at the jacuzzi of despair is to realise how layered our planet is, not just in sediment and stone, but in conditions, thresholds, and invisible walls. Life isn't limited by the absence of light or the presence of pressure. It's limited by the borders we cannot see but always feel. Salinity, toxicity, the narrow range where existence remains possible. It's easy to imagine the ocean as one endless mass of blue, but it isn't. It's a collection of zones, each with its own rules, its own temperatures, its own sounds and silences. And within these zones are smaller pockets of contrast, like this strange underwater lake, whose surface you can ripple but not cross without consequence. Perhaps that's why this place captures the imagination. Not because it's loud or violent, or even unusual in geological terms, but because it feels like a secret, something the Earth is keeping just out of reach, but still within sight, like a whispered memory resting at the edge of understanding. And maybe that's what the ocean is best at, holding contradiction. Here, in the Gulf of Mexico, there is a pool where life dies and thrives in the same breath, where the water above supports coral and fish, while the water below traps and kills, where a creature may glide through safety and slip by accident into silence. It's not evil, it's not kind, it simply is. A reminder that even on Earth there are places that feel alien, that even in our own oceans we have landscapes stranger than fiction, that life does not ask for comfort, it asks for chance. So as you drift through this story, picture the boundary, a smooth, glowing line across the deep pulsing faintly in the light of the submersible. Nothing marks it, and yet everything changes when it's crossed. Let's stay on the edge, for just a little longer. The deeper you go, the stranger things become, not in a frightening way, but in the quiet, surreal manner of a dream that makes perfect sense until you wake. There, in the twilight zone and beyond, where sunlight fades into memory and the pressure stacks like invisible bricks, the ocean keeps its most haunting forms, creatures that stretch and fold, that hover and drift, that look less like animals and more like thoughts swimming in the dark. Among the most ethereal is the oarfish. Rarely seen alive, it is a creature of myth made real, long, silver and ribbon-like, with a crest of red spines that flutter like the torn sails of a forgotten ship. It can grow longer than a bus, and yet it moves with the elegance of a leaf caught in water. When one washes ashore, as happens now and then, people whisper about omens, about sea serpents, about something large stirring beneath the waves, and it's not hard to see why. The oarfish is the likely source of many serpent legends. To a sailor glimpsing it from a wooden deck, its undulating motion would seem like the slithering of something monstrous. Its length defies expectation. Its eyes are unblinking, and its stillness, when encountered by divers, feels more like an apparition than a living thing. But the oarfish is not a monster. It's a filter feeder. It eats plankton and tiny crustaceans drifting through the depths with quiet indifference. And perhaps that's what makes it so compelling. It looks terrifying, but it simply floats. It doesn't attack. It doesn't flee. It just exists as if carved from moonlight and left to drift through time. And it's not alone in its dreamlike strangeness. The frilled shark, another elusive creature, is often called a living fossil. With a mouth lined in rows of backward-facing teeth and a body that undulates more like an eel than a modern shark, it resembles something from a time long before humans. It has barely changed in tens of millions of years, not because it is primitive, but because it was already well suited to its shadowy world. Then there is the big fin squid. Its limbs are long and thin, with elbow-like joints that seem to move in ways that defy biology. When caught on deep-sea cameras, it drifts through the water with its arms trailing vertically, like streamers on an invisible kite. It doesn't dart or flash. It simply hovers, impossibly slow, like it has nowhere to go and all the time in the world to get there. And the barrelly fish, perhaps one of the strangest of all. It has a transparent dome for a head, through which you can see its glowing green eyes, not in front where you'd expect, but pointed upward inside its skull. This allows it to look directly above without moving its body. Its whole life is shaped by subtlety. Floating, motionless, watching for the silhouette of prey drifting past the light above. These creatures do not swim like dolphins or glide like whales. They don't live by the urgency of the surface. Their movements are slow, sometimes barely perceptible. They conserve energy. They wait. And their shapes reflect the softness of their world, a place where gravity is constant but light is rare and the usual rules do not apply. Then, down in the colder depths, there's a pale, almost translucent little octopus known affectionately as the Casper octopus. First filmed by Noe in 2016, it was named for its ghostly appearance. With no chromatophores, those pigment cells that allow most octopuses to change colour, Casper appears milky white, soft and oddly endearing. It was seen slowly crawling along the seafloor, wrapping its arms gently around nodules of manganese, and, perhaps most tenderly, laying its eggs there. This ghost of the deep didn't hunt. It didn't flee. It simply nested, quietly, without ceremony. What ties these creatures together is not just their strangeness, but their softness, their refusal to conform to the familiar, their rejection of surface rules. They seem more like dreams given form, liminal, gentle, drifting between presence and absence. They are reminders that evolution doesn't always favour aggression or speed. Sometimes it favours patience. Sometimes survival means folding yourself into the silence, into the cold, and becoming something that doesn't need to be seen to matter. There's a kind of reverence that comes with observing these beings, not just because they are rare, or unusual, or old, but because they are different, because they ask nothing of us, and yet they give us so much. A glimpse of what life can become when shaped by shadows instead of sun. They're not nightmares. They're lullabies in the language of biology. And as you drift deeper into the quiet, past the layers of pressure and the boundaries of light, it's comforting to know that down there, in the folds of the world, there are creatures still dreaming. Not of us. Not of survival. Just dreaming. Slowly. Gently. For no reason at all. Let's drift with them, just a little longer. The ocean is often called silent, but that's only because our ears aren't tuned to its frequencies. Beneath the waves, it hums with voices we barely understand. Long, slow notes stretching across continents, brief clicks like punctuation in the dark, patterns so intricate they seem to speak in riddles. The sea is not quiet. It is orchestral, and its songs, though strange to us, are older than our languages, deeper than our most ancient myths. Let's begin with the largest singer of them all, the blue whale. This creature, as long as 2 school buses placed end to end, moves through the sea with the gentleness of a drifting cathedral. Its call is one of the loudest sounds produced by any animal, yet we cannot hear it directly without the help of machines. Its frequencies fall below the range of human hearing, low enough to slip through entire oceans. A single call, lasting perhaps 10 or 20 seconds, can travel for hundreds or even thousands of miles through a special zone in the ocean known as the SOFAR channel, an acoustic layer where sound is preserved and carried like a message in a bottle. But why does the whale sing? The honest answer is, We don't fully know. Some researchers believe it is a mating ritual, a way for males to attract females across vast distances. Others think it may play a role in navigation or communication between pods, and perhaps it does all these things. Or perhaps, like human music, it began as function and became something more, a kind of presence, a way to mark time in a world that does not divide itself into hours and minutes, a song not meant to be heard but to be felt, and the whale is not alone in this. Fish sing too. Coral reefs, far from being silent, are some of the noisiest places in the ocean. Tiny fish make popping, croaking or drumming sounds as part of territorial defence, courtship, or simple location awareness. Some species hum during sunset as if responding to some invisible conductor. And shrimp, those small snapping architects of chaos, produce bursts of sound that rival gunshots in miniature. Their sharp crack isn't just loud, it creates a pressure bubble that stuns prey and echoes like a firecracker through the reef. Further down in the deep, the soundscape changes. It becomes slower, spaced out, less like a city and more like a meditation. There, strange harmonies emerge, long-distance pulses, rising moans, and sweeping sonic curves whose sources remain uncertain. We call them things like whistle, train, or upsweep. We hear them through hydrophones scattered across the globe, and while we can plot their paths, match their frequencies, even record their seasonal rhythms, we cannot always tell who or what is making them. Sound underwater travels differently. It moves faster. It bends around corners. It can arrive before the event that created it has ended. And it's everywhere, inside currents, bouncing off thermoclines trapped between surface and seafloor like echoes in a stone hallway. For creatures living in this medium, sound becomes more than noise. It becomes memory, geography, and language. It replaces vision in places where light does not reach. Some animals use echolocation, bouncing clicks off objects to see with their ears. Others interpret the faintest variations in rhythm to distinguish friend from stranger, predator from mate, safety from threat. In the darkness of the deep sea, being heard can mean being found, but it can also mean being eaten. And so, silence becomes a kind of camouflage. Many deep-sea creatures make no noise at all, not because they lack the capacity, but because, evolutionarily, it is safer. To live in the abyss is to exist in a world of restraint. You do not flash. You do not shout. You do not announce your presence unless absolutely necessary. It is a place of long waiting, patient drifting, and decisions made with care. But that silence is not emptiness. It is layered, full of pressure waves, tectonic murmurs, the occasional hum of submarine engines, and the ever-present background crackle of life quietly doing what life does, eating, reproducing, hiding, dying. And in this quiet, some species still choose to sing. There is a fish called the plain-fin midshipman, an unassuming little creature with a remarkable ability. During mating season, males build nests and then hum, not once, not briefly, but continuously. Some have been known to hum for over an hour at a time, producing a sound not unlike an electrical transformer underwater. Females, drawn by the sound, choose mates based on the pitch and duration of their call. To our ears, it might seem absurd. But to the fish, it's a love song, and one that must be performed in the right key, at the right time, in the right current, or not at all. There's something deeply human in that. A creature singing in the dark, unsure who's listening, unsure what response will come, if any. But still singing, still trying. The ocean's soundscape, like its geography, remains largely unmapped. We've catalogued many voices, we've traced many echoes, but the full chorus, the complete composition, remains beyond our grasp. And perhaps that's fitting. Perhaps some songs are meant only for those who live in them. For the rest of us, listening from above, it's enough to know they exist. that even in the deepest parts of our world, where no light shines, something still hums, still pulses, still reaches outward. Not always to warn, not always to attract, sometimes just to be. And if that isn't a lullaby in its purest form, a quiet call into the vastness, unanswered but offered all the same, then what is? Let's keep listening just a little longer. If you were to hold your breath and sink down, far below the reach of sunlight and storms, into the dark, cold stillness of the deep sea, time itself would seem to slow. Everything moves differently down there. Fish hover without hurry. Currents flow like heavy syrup. Life does not flash, it flickers, low and long. This part of the ocean doesn't just resist light, it resists haste. And within it dwell some of the most ancient lives on Earth. Let's begin with the Greenland shark, a creature whose age is not measured in decades but in centuries. Found mostly in the frigid waters of the North Atlantic and Arctic Oceans, the Greenland shark is not just one of the largest carnivorous sharks. It may also be the longest-lived vertebrate known to science. Some individuals, through carbon dating of their eye lens proteins, have been estimated to be over 400 years old. 4 centuries. That means there are sharks alive today that were already swimming through cold, black currents when Galileo turned his telescope to the sky. Before Beethoven, before electricity. And how do they live so long? Perhaps it's because they live so slowly. Greenland sharks move at a glacial pace, rarely faster than a gentle glide. Their metabolism is extremely slow. Their environment is consistently cold, which may reduce biological stress. They eat opportunistically, scavenging what they find. There's no rush, because in the deep, nothing happens quickly. And in that stillness, something remarkable is preserved. Not youth, but endurance. They do not rush toward anything, and perhaps that is their secret. They are not the only long-living beings beneath the sea. The bowhead whale, native to Arctic and subarctic regions, also lives for well over 200 years. These massive whales, scarred by harpoons from long-past hunts, carry history in their bodies, literal traces of contact with 19th century whalers embedded in their blubber, alongside modern wounds and adaptations. They sing too. Bowhead songs are complex and change yearly, possibly even seasonally. Their language is fluid and evolving, passed not just between individuals, but between generations that may overlap in time spans most species never witness. To live for centuries is to see not just seasons, but epochs. And then there is the immortal jellyfish, Turritopsis dohrnii. It is small, fragile, nearly transparent. It drifts without muscle or brain, carried by the tides. And yet, it has accomplished something extraordinary. It can, under the right conditions, reverse its own aging process. When threatened by injury, starvation, or environmental stress, it reverts to an earlier stage of life. Not metaphorically, literally. It transforms its adult cells into a polyp form, effectively starting over, not once, not figuratively, again and again. In theory, this means it could live forever. In practice, of course, many die from predation or illness before that ever happens. But the possibility remains, a loop rather than a line. A way to restart, not just survive. And in that cycle lies a kind of poetic defiance. Not of death, but of endings. These timekeepers of the ocean are not urgent. They do not shine brightly or move swiftly. They do not dazzle, they endure. They remind us that longevity is not always about invincibility. Sometimes it's about rhythm, about slowness, about stillness and the willingness to wait. It's tempting to think of long life as a triumph, but in the ocean it feels more like a kind of deep listening, a patience with time itself, a pact made with darkness and cold, trading speed for peace. These creatures are not racing toward any finish line. They're drifting, gliding, pulsing through centuries as if they had all the time in the world, because in a way they do. And what better metaphor for sleep than that? Sleep, too, is a quiet form of time travel. You close your eyes, and hours pass like moments. Your body rests, your mind folds inward, and without effort or noise you age just a little. Not in a dramatic way, not with ceremony, just gently. Like a Greenland shark passing beneath the ice. Like a bowhead whale singing beneath the northern lights. Like a jellyfish starting over. In a world that glorifies acceleration, these creatures offer another model, one of steady presence. They do not panic, they do not boast, they do not seek the spotlight, and yet they survive, not for years, but for lifetimes beyond our comprehension. Perhaps they understand something we do not, that life is not measured best by how brightly it burns, but by how long it glows, that slowness is not weakness, that silence is not absence, that endurance, even in obscurity, is its own kind of brilliance. So tonight, as you let your body rest and your breath slow, imagine those ancient lives continuing beneath the waves, not just surviving, but existing, quietly, continuously, patiently. They are not waiting for anything. They are not watching us, but they are there, drifting in the deep. Let's drift with them a little while longer. There is a spot in the Pacific Ocean where, if you stood, or rather floated, no human being would be closer to you than the astronauts aboard the International Space Station. Not a ship, not a boat, not a speck of passing civilization. Just water. Thousands of kilometers in every direction. A perfect center of nowhere. This is Point Nemo. Its name, of course, is no accident. Nemo, from the Latin for no one, is also the reclusive captain of Jules Verne's Nautilus, the ghost of a man who fled the surface world to vanish into the sea. And that literary echo is strangely appropriate here. Point Nemo, officially the oceanic pole of inaccessibility, is more concept than place, yet it's real, and it waits in a vast nothingness near 48 degrees 52.6 minutes south, 123 degrees 23.6 minutes west. There's no land within 2,688 kilometres in any direction. The closest people are the rotating crew aboard the ISS, who orbit about 400 kilometres above Earth. In every other way you would be entirely, utterly alone, but that doesn't mean it's empty. Point Nemo has a peculiar modern role. It is a kind of graveyard, a cosmic one. For decades, it has been the final resting place for spacecraft no longer in service. When satellites and stations reach the end of their orbital lives, their paths are often carefully planned to descend, burn through the atmosphere and fall into the ocean, and they fall here, into Point Nemo. It's far from shipping routes, far from fisheries, far from eyes, the perfect place to let things go. Over 260 pieces of space debris have been guided into these waters. Russian resupply ships, defunct satellites, and even, in 2001, the massive 120-ton Mir space station. Each descent ends with a fiery re-entry, a brief flame against the upper atmosphere, and then, if any fragments remain, a quiet splash into the deep. No plaque marks these burials. No sonar scans track the debris on the seafloor. They are gone, folded into the dark like ink into water. And isn't that strangely poetic? We spend decades building machines to touch the stars. Solar panels, radio dishes, engines, guidance systems. Launch them into orbit. Let them orbit for years, for decades even. And then, when they're finally spent, they return not to a museum or a monument, but to this featureless patch of ocean where no one waits, as if the sea itself agrees to hold what we no longer need. Point Nemo is the end of things, but perhaps it is also a beginning. Because what is the sea, if not a cradle and a tomb at once? It births storms and carries ships. It takes and returns. It holds fossils of things long, buried in the silent wreckage of things that never touched land. It stores memory, but does not speak of it. And in Point Nemo, all these traits seem to converge, not in drama, but in stillness. Imagine floating there at the centre of that quiet. No wind, no birds, no passing vessel, only the sound of your own breath inside your diving mask, or perhaps the low hum of a submersible engine far beneath the surface. Nothing but horizon, curved faintly at the edges, and the knowledge that below you lies not coral, not reef, not bustling schools of fish, but centuries of spacefall. Human invention, slowly corroding in saltwater silence. There's something comforting in that. Strange, perhaps, but comforting. That our most ambitious machines, after circling the Earth hundreds of times, do not vanish into chaos or fire, but descend gently into the sea. That they fall not just anywhere, but to a place named No One. Point Nemo feels like a pause in geography, a breath between the names and nations. It's not marked by buoy or border, it holds no flag, and yet it has become, almost accidentally, a sacred space of forgetting. No one stands vigil, no one mourns, and still the sea accepts what is offered. Some might find this lonely, but maybe it's not loneliness, maybe it's solitude. Maybe Point Nemo isn't a void, but a vessel, an invisible archive of everything we once sent upward, now returning quietly to where the world can hold it again. And perhaps there's a lesson in that even our greatest endeavours, flights into orbit, missions beyond the moon, must eventually come home. Not in triumph, not in noise, but in soft descent, in a hush of steam and salt and gravity. There is dignity in this surrender, a grace in giving up speed and returning to stillness. So if ever you need to imagine the farthest place from people, not just physically, but spiritually, don't think of a mountaintop or an Arctic tundra. Think of Point Nemo. Think of the place where the sky meets the sea, not in light, but in weight, and know that even there, in the farthest reaches, we've left a trace, not in conquest, but in letting go. Let's drift over it, for just a little longer. Just off the coast of Yonaguni Island in Japan, beneath the warm, clear waters of the East China Sea, lies something that shouldn't be there. At a depth of around 25 metres, carved into the bedrock of the seafloor, is a structure. A series of sharp angles, flat plains, broad terraces, and what look like deliberate steps, rising and falling in precise geometric patterns. It's massive, layered, and strangely elegant. Divers who first saw it thought it resembled a sunken temple, or perhaps a fortress from another age. And ever since its discovery in the 1980s, the question has remained, is this the work of nature or of ancient hands now forgotten? This is the Yonaguni Monument. Seen from above, it does not look random. It has right angles, column-like walls, what appears to be a ramp or staircase, and large stone slabs that evoke memories of ziggurats or stepped pyramids. There are places where the rock edges so sharply against itself that it feels intentional, too clean, too aligned. And in our pattern-hungry minds, it begins to resemble purpose. For some, this is proof of lost civilizations. Perhaps it's the remains of an ancient coastal city swallowed by earthquakes and sea rise thousands of years ago. Some have called it Japan's Atlantis. Others suggest it could be remnants of the mythical land of Mu, a legendary Pacific continent said to have vanished beneath the waves. There are even claims, though speculative, of inscriptions or symbols etched into the stone, worn nearly smooth by time but still hinting at language. But geologists offer a different interpretation. The monument, they say, is almost certainly natural. The region is composed of sandstone, which breaks along horizontal bedding planes and vertical joints, creating formations that can easily mimic architectural features. Earthquakes, common in this tectonically active region, can fracture rock in ways that produce uncanny symmetry. Over time, erosion from waves and currents sharpens edges, creating the illusion of construction where none occurred. Nature is a master of mimicry. And sometimes, what looks like a carving is just coincidence. shaped by wind, water, and time. Yet the monument continues to straddle a strange line, too ordered to dismiss entirely, too ambiguous to confirm. It lives in the space between certainty and myth, where facts dissolve into interpretation. And maybe that's what gives it such power. Because not every mystery is meant to be solved. Some are meant to be wondered at, viewed not as puzzles with answers, but as poems carved into stone, written in a language we no longer speak. There is a kind of peace in that. The Yonaguni monument doesn't shout for attention. It doesn't demand belief. It just sits, motionless, beneath the sea, letting divers glide along its edges and archaeologists debate its origin. It offers no confirmation, only possibility. And in that way, it becomes something more than geology or archaeology. It becomes a kind of mirror, reflecting our own hopes, doubts, and desires back at us. Those who want to believe in lost cities will find echoes of ancient architects in its walls. Those who trust in sediment and fault lines will find a masterclass in erosion. And in the quiet space between both, something else takes shape. The ability to sit with not knowing. In the world above, we often demand answers. We search, we test, we conclude. But the ocean teaches us that sometimes wonder is enough. That sometimes the beauty lies not in the explanation, but in the absence of one. It's easy to forget how young our species is, how new our history, how brief our civilizations compared to the Earth itself. Whether Yonaguni is a monument or a marvel of geology, it reminds us that stone remembers far more than we do. It holds time in layers, it builds stories we cannot read, and it waits patiently for eyes willing to look without needing to name. There are places beneath the sea where meaning becomes soft, where structures blur into landscapes, where time folds into the seabed and the difference between human and natural becomes less important than the simple fact that something exists. And isn't that enough? Isn't it enough to drift over a shape that might be a ruin, or a reef, or both, and feel the old ache of curiosity without urgency? To trace a line of stone with your eyes and know it could be anything, or nothing, and still be beautiful. The Yonaguni monument will not tell us what it is. It does not speak. It offers no relics, no inscriptions, no tools, only lines and edges, only silence. But in that silence something stirs, not answers, but questions, and sometimes those are more valuable. So tonight, as you breathe slowly and the edges of thought begin to blur, imagine gliding over that sunken shape. Picture the sea gently folding around it, soft currents brushing over steps that may have never seen feet. Let yourself wonder, not loudly, not urgently, but gently, and let that wonder drift, like silt in the water, never quite settling. Let's keep drifting quietly through the unspoken. The ocean floor is a map not yet drawn. Though we speak of the world as if it has been fully measured, charted and named, the truth is that vast swaths of the seafloor remain as mysterious to us as the surface of a distant moon. And every so often technology catches a glimpse of something odd, something that doesn't quite fit, and we are reminded again that the Earth is still full of questions waiting in the dark. One of the most enduring examples of this quiet, unresolved curiosity is the Baltic Sea anomaly. In 2011, a Swedish diving team using sonar equipment to scan the seafloor stumbled upon an unusual shape, an object roughly 60 meters wide, lying 90 meters below the surface of the northern Baltic Sea. On the sonar scan, it appeared as a large disc-like formation with strangely smooth edges, what some interpreted as steps, ramps, or even architectural lines. To the untrained eye, it resembled something unnatural, almost like a spacecraft resting on the seabed, half buried in silt. The media, hungry for mystery, dubbed it the Baltic Sea UFO. The name stuck. Speculation followed quickly. Was it a sunken man-made structure, a secret Nazi weapon, an ancient temple from a lost civilization, or, the wildest suggestion of all, an actual alien spacecraft resting quietly at the bottom of the sea? Geologists were quick to respond, and their conclusions were more grounded. Most likely, they said, it's a rock formation. The sonar image was low resolution and prone to interpretation bias. Glacial activity during the Ice Age could have scraped and deposited sediment in patterns that now appear artificial. The lines might be fractures, the ramp a natural incline. The anomaly, in their view, was geologically interesting but not supernatural. But the story doesn't end with explanation, because what the Baltic Sea anomaly really represents is not an object, but a pattern, one that repeats itself all over the world's oceans. Time and again we detect things on the seafloor that stir our imagination, not because they are clearly defined, but because they remain undefined. A shadow with straight edges, a mound that seems just a bit too round, a blip on the scanner that doesn't quite make sense, and into those gaps we pour wonder. One such place is not a specific object, but a hypothesis, an idea both scientifically grounded and wildly expansive, the concept of an underground ocean, not beneath the crust but far deeper, inside the Earth's mantle. For years, geophysicists have theorized that there may be vast reservoirs of water, locked away, not as lakes or seas, but as molecules embedded in minerals deep within the mantle. Not liquid water as we know it, but water bound in ringwoodite, a high-pressure form of olivine. Experiments and seismic data have supported this idea, suggesting that the amount of water hidden in this deep interior layer may rival or even exceed the volume of all the surface oceans combined. It's a strange idea, this hidden sea. It does not shimmer or reflect light. It does not flow. And yet it may play a critical role in the Earth's geology, affecting volcanic activity, plate tectonics, and even the long-term cycling of elements between core and crust. To imagine a sea inside the Earth is to stretch the boundaries of what a sea can be. It challenges our assumptions. It invites metaphor. What if our oceans are not the beginning, but only the surface echo of something deeper still? From this perspective, the ocean isn't just the space between land masses. It's a layered mystery, built downward as much as outward. The Baltic Sea anomaly, the murmur of a buried sea, the countless unclassified shapes on the seafloor, they all whisper the same idea. The world is more layered than we think, and those layers are not just physical, they are emotional, imaginative, full of the quiet longing to know more, to see what lies just beyond clarity. And isn't that what exploration truly is? Not the conquest of new lands, but the willingness to dwell in the unknown, to sit with shapes that may never become definite, to find peace not in the certainty of discovery, but in the beauty of mystery. There are so many things we don't understand about the ocean, not because we lack the tools, but because we haven't asked the right questions, or because we've barely scratched the surface of answers too deep for words. What we call anomalies may be misinterpretations, or they may be the first glimpses of new truths. Either way, they serve the same purpose. They remind us that the Earth is still a place of wonder, that even with our satellites and sonar and deep-sea probes, there are still corners of our own planet that feel alien, and there's comfort in that. Because if everything were explained, where would the dreaming go? If every shape were named, if every signal had a source, if every shadow had a face, then we might lose that soft ache of not knowing. That gentle, persistent tug that keeps us looking just a little deeper. So, as you lie back, eyes closed, breath steady, imagine the sea floor stretching beneath you, not flat but folded, filled with ridges and ridges beneath those ridges. Somewhere down there, a disc-shaped formation waits in the dark. Somewhere even deeper, a sea without motion holds itself inside stone, and somewhere above all of that, we are still wondering. Let's drift with the questions. Let's stay curious. the sea doesn't always keep what it swallows. Sometimes it gives things back, but rarely in the form they left. Over days or weeks or centuries it softens them, reshapes them, confuses their outlines. And then one morning, after a storm or a strange tide, something arrives, washed up on a quiet beach, covered in salt and thyme. Something that doesn't quite look like anything else. These are the globsters. The word itself is odd, almost playful, but what it describes is more ambiguous. Large, decayed masses of organic material that wash ashore without clear identity. They're not skeletons. They're not intact carcasses. They're shapeless in the way that memories are shapeless. Soft-edged, swollen, partially decomposed forms that could be whales or octopuses or something else entirely. They invite imagination, and they've done so for centuries. The most famous early globster appeared in 1896 on the coast near St. Augustine, Florida. It was enormous, weighing several tons, with what appeared to be arms or tentacles, and skin as tough as rubber. Scientists at the time were baffled. Newspapers speculated wildly. Was it a giant octopus, a sea monster, or something unknown to science? Later studies, of course, suggested it was likely the remains of a sperm whale, its more recognisable features long dissolved, leaving only connective tissue and the thick collagen that resists rot. But by then the image had already entered folklore. A creature from the deep, cast ashore in the shape of mystery. Other globsters followed, on beaches in Tasmania, Newfoundland, Bermuda, and the Chilean coast. Some were misidentified basking sharks, whose carcasses decompose in ways that make them appear almost serpentine. Others were confirmed whales or large fish. A few were never definitively named, and that's part of what makes them compelling. In a world obsessed with clarity, a globster is a kind of anti-definition. It's what happens when the sea gives us something we can't quite categorise, something that resists taxonomy, that falls outside our mental filing cabinets. It doesn't arrive with a label or a lesson. It just arrives and asks us to look and to wonder. Sometimes, the more grotesque the shape, the more imaginative the explanation. Take the so-called Montauk monster, which washed up on a New York beach in 2008. It was small, hairless, with an elongated face and sharp teeth, looking half raccoon, half reptile. Theories flew. Was it a genetic experiment? A mutant creature from a lab? A diseased animal transformed by pollution? Most likely it was a decomposing raccoon, swollen and stretched by water and sun. But again, the truth mattered less than the image. What stirred people wasn't the answer. It was the moment of not knowing, the breath before the label settled in. These beach-born enigmas speak to something deeper than science. They remind us that the ocean is not just a place of biology and current, but of transformation. Things go into it one way and come out another, shape-shifted, rewritten, unfinished. Even familiar creatures, when returned by the sea, often arrive looking unfamiliar. Think of a jellyfish, already translucent and unanchored, flattened by sand, glistening in the morning sun like a puddle from another world. Or a dolphin, elegant in life, bloated and torn by the gentle violence of waves. The ocean isn't cruel. It just doesn't preserve what we want it to. It preserves what it does. And that gap between our desire for clarity and the sea's indifference to it is where myths are born. It's tempting to ask why these things unsettle us. Why does a shapeless blob on the beach make us think of monsters or lost species or conspirators? Perhaps because it disrupts the illusion that we know what everything is. It reminds us that life isn't always neatly outlined. That identity can erode, and what's left behind is sometimes too vague to name, and yet there's beauty in that vagueness. These ocean offerings are like dreams that never fully form, images that suggest but don't declare. You see a curve and think tentacle, you see a ridge and think spine, but the whole never quite comes together. It remains open, suggestive, a mystery held together by decay and distance. In this way, the shoreline becomes a boundary not just between land and sea, but between knowledge and imagination. On one side, we have species lists, measurements, and field guides. On the other, we have stories, fears, and the soft uncertainty of the unknown. And sometimes something steps across that line, dripping with salt water, and rests at our feet, asking nothing but attention. To walk a beach in the early morning, after a night of high tide, is to walk a gallery of unfinished forms, seaweed shaped like letters from an alien script, driftwood curved like sleeping limbs, shells that once held life, now echoing with nothing, and every so often something more, something large, unnamed, left behind. We don't always need to understand what the ocean gives us. Sometimes it is enough to receive, to behold, and to accept that not everything will fit into the diagrams we've drawn, that some shapes belong to silence, that some creatures, even in death, refuse to be sorted. Let's stand beside one now, on a dreamt shore. The morning air is cool, the waves speak in low breath. Before you lies something enormous, pale and ambiguous. You do not recognize it. But you don't recoil. You lean in. You wonder. And in that moment, the story is born, not in the thing itself, but in the way you hold it in your mind. Let's keep wondering, softly. Some fears do not come from the outside. They do not swim toward us or crash over the bow. Instead, they rise quietly from within. Not because the sea is doing something frightening, but because our minds are. The ocean, after all, is not just a body of water. It is a screen, a mirror, a stage. And sometimes, what we project onto it is stranger than anything it contains. There's a name for one such feeling, submechanophobia. It's the fear of submerged man-made objects, old propellers, coral-crusted engines, forgotten submarines lying still in the dark. You see them not moving, not threatening, but somehow wrong, unsettling, as if they still remember what they were, as if they're waiting to start again. It isn't a fear of drowning or of being attacked. It's quieter than that. It's the fear of presence where there should be none, a metal shape half buried in sand, a statue with eyes made of barnacles, a ship that will never surface again. The object becomes a ghost, and the water its shroud. And it's not irrational, because the sea has a long memory. What we leave there does not disappear. It lingers, it weathers. It becomes part of the seascape, but never fully of it. Even coral-encrusted wrecks don't blend completely. They always feel a little added, as though they were never meant to be there, but now they are, and they are not leaving. This discomfort, this uncanny feeling, is not about danger. It's about displacement. Things from our orderly world dropped into the deep where order dissolves. Machines that once moved with purpose, now idle and rusting, whispering through the currents in a language no one hears anymore. You might think of a place like the Sargasso Sea, a region of the Atlantic where seaweed gathers in strange golden mats and the water moves in slow spirals. There are no coasts here, no rivers feeding into it, just ocean slowly circling. Sailors of past centuries feared it, not because it was violent, but because it wasn't. Ships could become trapped in its calm, windless reaches. Stories arose of vessels that vanished here, left to rot as tendrils of seaweed crept aboard like fingers. The Sargasso Sea doesn't attack, it absorbs. And perhaps that's what unnerves us most. Not the storm, but the stillness. The idea that the sea does not need to strike to take us. It only needs to wait. Our stories reflect this. In 2003, researchers tagged a healthy great white shark off the coast of Australia, tracking its movements through a temperature and depth sensor. For a while, everything seemed normal until the data spiked. The sensor suddenly recorded a rapid plunge, hundreds of meters deep, and a temperature shift that suggested the tag had moved inside the stomach of something else. Whatever had eaten the shark was larger, faster, and capable of diving deeper than its prey. Theories emerged. A larger shark, a killer whale, or in more poetic corners of the imagination, something unknown. And further back, in the shadowed archives of maritime history, there's a stranger story still, the 1915 U-boat encounter. As the story goes, a German submarine torpedoed an enemy vessel during World War I. After the explosion, a massive creature supposedly emerged from the water, serpentine, monstrous, disoriented by the blast. The stunned U-boat crew claimed to have seen it writhing before it slipped beneath the surface again, never to be seen. Skeptics argue the story is apocryphal, a wartime tale embellished into legend, and perhaps it is. But even if the creature never existed, the need for the story did. In times of fear and silence, the mind writes its own scripts. That's the thing about the ocean. It doesn't have to hide monsters for us to see them. We bring our own, and this isn't a flaw. It's a feature of how we engage with the unknown. We fill in the blanks with symbols. We make metaphors out of currents. We assign emotion to the sound of sonar pings echoing off hulls. The sea becomes a vessel not just for salt and life, but for meaning. A diver enters a shipwreck and feels the hush of pressure, the absence of movement, the eerie symmetry of beams once walked by human feet. It is not a haunted house, but it feels like one. The fish drifting through the captain's quarters don't know they're trespassing, but we do. In a way, every submerged wreck is a time capsule, a fossil not of bone, but of moment, and because water distorts and softens, these places become dreamlike, not frozen in time, but suspended in it. And our dreams too are oceans of half-formed things, shapes that move just beyond the edge of logic, stories that begin but never quite end. The sea feels familiar to the dreaming mind, because it too refuses to explain itself, and so we project. We turn shadows into creatures. We turn seaweed into fingers. We turn sunken machines into memories. And we feel in the quietest part of ourselves that something vast and watching lives just beneath. But it doesn't threaten. It waits. And when it gives something back, an image, a legend, a moment, it's not to frighten us. It's to remind us that wonder is not made of clarity. It's made of tension. A balance between the known and the almost known, between what is there and what might be. Let's hold that tension gently, like the surface of still water. Let's float. If you picture the ocean as a kind of mirror, you begin to notice something strange. It reflects not only light, but thought. Not only the sky above, but the unconscious beneath. Every time we peer into its depths, we're not just looking outward, we're also looking in. And the deeper we go, the more we recognize ourselves in the silence. The ocean is not empty. It never was. We used to think of the deep sea as a void, a lifeless abyss, black and still, stretching endlessly beneath the waves. But that belief, like so many others, was born of distance. We simply didn't know how to see what was there. Now, with remote cameras, sonar and submersibles, we know that the depths are teeming, with creatures, with movements, with patterns so subtle and slow they escaped our notice for centuries. But even now, as we catalogue the species, as we map the ridges and trenches, we still carry a sense that something remains hidden, not just biologically but philosophically, emotionally. The ocean holds more than life. It holds memory, possibility, and something harder to define, something close to dream. It is, in a way, the mind of the planet. Not the brain, with its frantic synapses and conscious plans, but the mind beneath the mind. The place where stories are shaped before they're spoken, where feelings take form without needing names, where time folds back on itself like currents under pressure. It's no coincidence that we compare the sea to sleep. Both are places where we release control, where we drift instead of walk, where we surrender the sharp outlines of reason and float in a medium of fluid associations. The ocean does not forget because it never decides what to remember. It simply holds, like the unconscious. Like the part of you that notices the way light falls on water, even when you're too tired to describe it. And when something emerges from that abyss, an idea, a creature, a sound, it does so not with clarity, but with resonance. It feels true before it is proven. It carries the weight of depth, even if it rises only briefly to the surface. We often speak of the iceberg metaphor, the idea that for every visible part of something, there is a far larger mass hidden beneath. We use it to talk about trauma, or instinct, or the slow formation of behaviour, but it also describes knowledge itself. What we know, truly know, is a small tip. What we suspect, imagine, dream, or feel, those lie below, cold, immense, still shaping us. The ocean teaches this without speaking it. It teaches through pressure, through shadow, through the slow movements of tectonic plates beneath a curtain of blue. It teaches through absence, the absence of light, of noise, of certainty, and in that absence it makes room for presence, for what's underneath, for what isn't finished. And perhaps that's why we keep returning to it, not just in boats and documentaries, but in dreams, in language, in the quiet moments before sleep. It represents something that cannot be exhausted, something that will not give us all the answers, something vast enough to hold our questions without collapsing under their weight. You might think of the Marianas Trench, not just the deepest part of the ocean, but the deepest part of the Earth's crust, a place so far removed from human contact that it might as well be lunar. Yet even there, we have found life, small, slow, almost still, but alive, holding on in silence, in pressure we can't fathom, in temperatures we wouldn't survive. It reminds us that mystery does not mean emptiness. Mystery means potential. And this is the final gift of the sea. It does not resolve. It invites. It does not shout. It hums. It does not rush. It waits. You could spend a lifetime studying it and never run out of questions. You could catalogue 1 million species and still leave more unnamed. You could drop 1,000 sensors and still miss the thing that matters most. Because the sea, like the self, is not only about what's in it, it's about the way we relate to it, how we look, how we listen, and how we rest in its presence. So tonight, as you settle deeper into stillness, think not of the surface waves or the flashing fish or even the sunken ships. Think of the abyss, not as absence, but as presence too big for words. Think of the gentle truth that not everything must be illuminated to be loved, that not everything must be mapped to be meaningful, that the deepest parts of life, like the deepest parts of the ocean, will never be fully known. And that's okay. That's not failure. That's beauty. That's wonder. That's the permission to float in the dark and feel whole anyway. You are not falling. You are drifting. You are not lost. You are part of the sea. Let the weight of questions lift. Let the answers remain unwritten. Let the ocean hold you, not like a container, but like a lullaby. You don't have to know everything to rest. You only have to let go. There's a stillness at the end of a long dive, not the sudden kind that jolts the breath, but a gradual enveloping hush, the kind that settles over your skin like silk, wrapping itself around you, smoothing the edges of thought. You're not falling anymore. You're not searching. You're just there, floating, and this now is where we are. You followed the currents through myth and pressure, through silence and sound, through fossils and fears and the long corridors of forgotten ships. You've heard the ocean whisper, not in answers, but in presence, and now it cradles you gently as if to say, you don't need to ask anything more, you're already home. You see, the ocean doesn't seek resolution. It doesn't package meaning with neat edges. It doesn't mind that we don't understand it. In fact, it prefers that we don't rush to explain. What it offers isn't clarity, it's constancy. A rhythm older than language, a breath that never stops. And through that rhythm it reminds us that being held is enough. There is nothing to prove to the sea. You don't have to know the names of its creatures or the physics of its tides to belong to it. You only have to be willing to listen, to let yourself dissolve a little, like salt, to feel that something vast and slow-moving accepts your presence without question. You're not an intruder here. You're a part of this, like plankton drifting with the light, like an oarfish dancing where no eyes watch, like a whisper echoing down the walls of a trench so deep, even time feels slower there. You belong, not because you're significant, but because you are soft enough to drift. And drift we will, out beyond the edge of what is known, past the charts, the legends, the sensors, into the waters that hold the remnants of satellites, the bones of stories, and the fragments of things that never needed a name, into that deep, slow region where fear loosens and curiosity stretches its limbs like a sleepy thought at dawn. Sleep, too, is an ocean. It pulls you under, gently but firmly. It doesn't ask for effort, only surrender. It carries you through layers, conscious, subconscious, dreaming, each darker and more forgiving than the last. And just like the sea, it shows you things you don't fully understand. Not to frighten you, but to remind you that not knowing is its own kind of peace. You've reached the part of the journey where the boundaries blur, where waves and thoughts feel the same, where the air around you thickens into stillness, and in that stillness there is space, for rest, for breath, for the kind of quiet that doesn't ask to be filled. There are no monsters here, only shadows made gentle by time. No danger waits, only silence. No map is needed. The way forward is not forward at all. It's inward, downward, deeper into the soft sediment of calm. You're not falling. You're sinking like a pearl through dark water, weightless, slow, sure. And the ocean is still here. It hasn't changed. It hasn't closed its arms. It hasn't asked for anything in return. It simply continues to be what it always was, a vast, breathing presence, a cradle made of salt and mystery, a place where even fear sleeps. And you may sleep here too, with the waves just above, with the stars somewhere beyond, with the creatures who have never seen the surface and don't need to, with the bones of ships and the soft trails of jellyfish and the long, slow heartbeat of the earth itself. You are not alone in this water. You're surrounded by silence, by time, by the quiet memory of things you forgot you loved. So let your thoughts uncoil, let your questions slow, let your body be heavy and your breath light. Let go of edges and names and goals. You've already arrived. You do not need to surface tonight. You can stay here with the sea. It will hold you without holding on. It will remember you, even if you forget yourself. It will wait, even if you drift. You're the diver who went deep enough to rest. You're the wanderer who stopped needing to arrive. You're the stardust that became breath, that became curiosity, that now becomes stillness. Sleep well, deep diver. The ocean is with you. The